Now at this point in time, our city fathers here in Cold Spring, you had Marcus Maurin and some of the business people were watching all this. And we had a flour mill here in town right at the dam, which at one time was owned by Henry Waite, the guy that they named Waite Park after today. That had a capacity of cranking out 450 barrels of flour a day. But up until this point, they had to load up the flour and haul it to St. Cloud in order to get it shipped to the markets east. And they thought, well, if the railroad could come through Cold Spring, every town that the railroad had touched so far was flourishing. And they thought it was absolutely vital that they get a line through here. So they got on a train to St. Cloud, and they went to go see Jim Hill. Well, when they got to see him, this didn't go over very well. He says, I've got a line just to the south of you, and I got a line just to the north of you. Why should I build a third line? So it took several attempts. And in the meantime, Jim was buying up what they called a lot of paper railroads. In that time period, there was a lot of speculation to build railroads, and people would sell stock, and land was appropriated, and at best they maybe did a little grading for the roadbed, and then things would fold up. Well, if he seen that he was going to build a line in a certain direction, he'd buy up those old charters and incorporate them into the St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Manitoba. One of these lines that he did buy was the St. Cloud and Austin Railroad Company. And they ended up selling all their property to St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Manitoba in 1886. So now we're going to build this line, and in 1885, 3 carloads of rail came into St. Cloud in the yards. It was destined to be set for building our line here. So then a contract was let for the building of the road in September of 1885 to D.C. Shepherd & Company out of St. Paul, and the Foley brothers out of St. Cloud were subcontractors. Now, they started building this railroad under the old charter of the St. Cloud and Austin Railway Company, but like I said, it was sold to the Manitoba in 1886. And some people say, well, the Manitoba built this line, and some people say the Austin Railroad built it. But during that time of construction, the transfer of title went over to the St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Manitoba. And the grading began on December 12th, and the track was laid to just 15 feet east of where the depot, this depot that we've seen, just 15 feet east of the depot that year. And during the winter months, the depot was built. That's this facility we see here today. And a water tank was put up. And in the spring, or I should say in March 2nd of 1886, the rest of the track laying resumed and went on to Wilmer. Now our depot here in town was the only one on the line at that time, and on July 6th of 1886, the depot opened for business. His first agent was J.B. Beatty, B-E-A-T-Y. Of course, the flour mill at the dam was owned by Henry Waite, and then several other owners owned it, and finally it was owned by Philip Cray, a local here in town that ran the mill, and he also had a excursion boat business down in the area where Lions Park is in the public access today. He would run a steamboat out of there, and it would take it up river and give tours. And they'd get up around Oster's Point and stop and have lunch, and this was quite popular for a lot of the people coming out of St. Cloud during the summer months. So he ran that business and the flour mill. Now, around 1900, Marcus Maurin built the Cold Spring elevator and started shipping grain as well. Somewhere in this time period between 1900 and 1920, this flour mill at the dam did burn down, but Philip Cray still owned the land. Okay, so we had the grain elevator, and they put up a stockyard just on the south side of town. And of course we had the Winter Company, which is still our oldest member or our customer from the railroad, getting their hardware, and they got into the coal business, and they also sold implements. Up until this point, I'm not sure if the creamery was still in operation yet or not. I know they had the old creamery said 1917. And I'm not sure just when the creamery started, but we'll get to that a little bit later. So we had freight and coming in, and of course the lumber yard was started. and the line was open for business. And then on August 11th, 1886, with the completion of the line, they sent an excursion train of 16 passenger cars, a superintendent's car, and a baggage car to celebrate the completion of the road from Willmar. And on that day, it was a free ride for all spectators along the line, and they hauled 1,766 people to St. Cloud. And when they got there, a bountiful lunch was provided, and then the afternoon was filled with races and baseball, and then the train returned back at about 6 o'clock in the evening. So regular business on the line here started officially on September 1st. They had a mixed passenger train and a freight train leaving St. Cloud daily at 3:25 in the afternoon and arrived at Willmar at 8 p.m. These freight trains, the local would spend the night in Willmar and the next day return. So it depended upon how long this schedule usually took, depending upon how much switching they had to do at all the towns along the way. But in the morning it would leave Willmar at 6:30 in the morning and arrive at St. Cloud roughly at 11 in the morning. We also had a mixed passenger train, number 31 and 32, known as the Dinky. Now this Dinky ran from Sandstone, Minnesota to Willmar, about a 135-mile distance one way on a 5 3/4 hour schedule one way. And of course it made 26 stops along the way. That's how many stations are along the line. It comprised of an engine and a locomotive, the engine and a tender, I should say, and then they had a mail baggage car and then 1 or 2 coaches, depending upon how many passengers they were hauling. Now this Dinky stayed into effect here for passenger service until 1954, and at that point passenger traffic had dropped off to the extent where the railroad discontinued passenger service on their branch lines, which was pretty much from here all the way to Washington State. In 1889, they incorporated the St. Paul, Minneapolis of Manitoba and gave it one more new name called the Great Northern. Jim Hill kind of liked that name, and he thought, well, this is the route it's going to go. So he consolidated all these railroads he had accumulated, including the paper railroads and what have you, and then leased out all this to the Great Northern for 999 years. Talk about looking ahead, huh?